I've always been active in student forums, especially when I was in college. It was a way to exchange ideas, study in a group, and even meet new people. One night, I entered an open chat, nothing very different from what I already did. Everything seemed normal, until an anonymous user started talking to me. At first, I thought it was just another common interaction. But suddenly, he started writing things that left me in shock. He mentioned the name of the street where I lived, described my father's car that was parked in front of the house, and even mentioned the last name of a teacher I had in high school. I had never put any of this in any profile or online conversation. My first thought was that maybe it was someone who knew me personally and was trying to scare me. I asked who it was, but the answer was only, "You know who I am." The cold and direct way you wrote, that made me feel like I was being watched at that very moment. With each new message, he added another detail of my life, such as the times when I used to leave for classes. I ran out of the computer and went to check the windows, as if somehow I was going to find him standing on the street. What terrified me the most was the fact that none of that was available online. I was careful. I had never posted an address, car, or personal details. Still, that person seemed to know more about me than I myself was ready to face. I went back to the front of the computer, and the chat window was still open. The user was still active, typing slowly, as if he wanted to prolong my fear. The last message that appeared was, "You left the kitchen light on." At that moment, I felt my stomach turn, because I had really forgotten this light on before going up to the room. I didn't think twice. I turned off the computer, locked all the doors, and went to check every room in the house. Everything was silent, but the feeling that I was not alone was suffocating. I spent the night awake, trying to understand how that person could have access to information so specific to my routine. The next day, I mentioned what happened to a close friend, but she thought I was exaggerating. I said it was probably just some classmate playing with me. But inside me I knew it wasn't just that. The level of detail, the way the person described my house and my schedules, that didn't seem like a simple joke. I decided to change my passwords, delete some old accounts, and even stopped attending forums for a while. Still, for a few weeks, I kept receiving anonymous messages at random times. Always short, always with information that only someone very close, or someone watching from the outside, could know. One of the most disturbing messages arrived at dawn, when I was lying down trying to sleep. My phone vibrated with an email notification from a nameless sender. The content was just a line, "You shouldn't sleep so late, Olivia." At that moment, I realized that whoever it was watching me in real time, and not just with information from the past. I spent days trying to track where those messages came from, but I never got anything concrete. I even considered going to the police, but there wasn't enough evidence, just anonymous texts that could be from anyone. Still, the feeling that there was someone behind the screen, following me at every step, made it impossible to go back to having the same online life as before. Over time, the messages stopped, but the fear remained. I was never able to use chats or forums in the same way again. Whenever I enter a social network, I feel the need to review what I'm posting 3 times, afraid that someone somewhere will use it against me. Even today, when I pass by the kitchen at night, I remember the sentence that person typed, and I feel the same chill I felt that morning. To this day, I have no idea who was behind those conversations. It could have been someone close. It could have been a complete stranger. What scares me is thinking that maybe it was someone closer than I imagined. And you, have you ever gone through something strange in online chats, or do you know someone who has experienced something similar? Story 2. I've always entered online chats for fun, especially those random ones where you never know who you're going to talk to. Most of the time it was a waste of time, but sometimes nice people came up to exchange ideas. One night, I met a user who seemed more curious than usual. He started asking me several questions, from silly things to more personal details. At first, I answered vaguely, without giving much information. But he insisted, always wanting to know more, where I lived, what school I had studied, even about my family's routine. When I realized I was getting weird, I decided to end the conversation. That's when he typed something that made me freeze. "You have a scar on your left arm, right?" I was paralyzed looking at the screen. That was not information that anyone could guess by chance. I really have a scar on my left arm, the result of a bicycle accident when I was a child. Only my close family knew this, and I had never mentioned it on social networks or online conversations. The heart began to race, and I felt as if, suddenly, I was no longer alone in my room. I tried to answer ironically, asking if he was guessing or kicking. But the answer came almost instant. I remember that day well. That was enough to make me close the chat immediately. But even after turning off the computer, I had the suffocating feeling that someone who really knew me was there on the other side of the screen. I spent the night awake, trying to understand how that person knew that specific detail. I shook my head thinking about possibilities. Could it be some cousin playing with me, some childhood friend who remembered the accident? But the truth is that no one but my closest family remembered that scar, and it was never something I showed or commented on. The next day, I decided to open the chat again, just to confirm if the account still existed. I searched for the user, but the profile had disappeared as if it had never existed. No history, no clue. It was as if someone had shown up just to send me that message, and then disappeared. That made me even more disturbed. In the days that followed, I started to get paranoid. Every time I left home, I had the feeling of being watched. When I walked to the car or went to the market, I looked over my shoulder expecting to see someone following me. The idea that that stranger could be someone close, someone who saw me every day, kept me on constant alert. I told my mother, and she was also scared. She remembered that, when I was a child, the bicycle accident had happened in front of the house, and some neighbors saw it. But that was years ago, and most people on that street didn't even live there anymore. So who, in the middle of 2020, would be using this information against me in an online chat? A week later, I received an anonymous message on my cell phone from an unknown number. It was short, only 2 words. I still remember. I had never shared my number in chats, and that made me really panic. I spent hours trying to find out how that person had gotten access, but I couldn't find an answer. I uninstalled all the chat apps I used and changed my number. Even so, I slept badly for months, always afraid that at any moment, that stranger could appear again. The scar on my arm, which I had never given importance, became a constant reminder that someone knew too much about me. Over time, the messages stopped, but the feeling of being watched never completely disappeared. Even today, when someone looks at my arm by chance, I have that irrational fear that they know something I didn't share. It was an experience that completely transformed the way I see the internet and how much we are really exposed without realizing it. I never found out who was on the other side of that screen, nor how he managed to know so much about me. But I know that, since that day, I can no longer trust anonymous online conversations. Sometimes I wonder, what if this person is still out there, just waiting for the right moment to come back? Would you keep using random chats after something like that? Story 3. I always used chat rooms to pass the time, especially at night, when I had nothing to do after studying. One of those nights, in Boston, I entered any chat, just like so many others I had already used. Everything seemed normal until, without warning, the screen suddenly blinked and I noticed something that left me in shock. In the lower corner of the screen, the image of my own webcam appeared, showing my room in real time. I hadn't activated anything, not even clicked on allow access. Before I could understand what was happening, a message appeared in the chat. Nice pajamas. It was as if, at that moment, someone was inside my computer, observing every detail. My heart raced at the time. I was lying down, wearing simple pajamas, and that meant that whoever was on the other side could really see me. I ran to cover the webcam with my hand, and then pulled out a sticker that I used precisely for that, but that I had forgotten to put on that night. Even so, the feeling of exposure was suffocating, as if the privacy of my room had been invaded. I tried to close the program, but the messages kept appearing. Some were just laughter, others described things that were in my room, like the pile of books on the desk and the blue mug on the nightstand. It was impossible to deny. The person wasn't inventing anything, he was really seeing everything around me. I turned off the computer by force, unplugged it, and still spent minutes looking at the black screen, as if something could reappear. The fear was not only of the digital invasion, but of the idea that someone had managed to cross the most intimate barrier of my life. It was as if that person had entered my room without having to open the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was wondering who could be behind this, some random hacker who just wanted to scare me, or someone who really had a specific interest in me. The detail that impressed me the most was the use of simple, direct English, as if the person had full confidence in the impact it would cause. The next day, I took my notebook to a technician, trying to find some explanation. He said it was possible that I had clicked on some malicious link, or that someone had used a program to activate the webcam remotely. What scared me was hearing from him that this was more common than I imagined, and that often people only find out when something strange happens. I changed all the passwords, formatted the computer, and bought a new protection for the webcam. Still, the feeling of insecurity did not disappear. Every time I open the notebook, even with the camera covered, I feel that someone may be watching. It's a kind of paranoia that I had never lived before, and that since then accompanies me in every video call or computer use. A few weeks later, I received a strange email from an unknown address. There were no attachments, just a short line. "I liked the color of your room." My stomach turned, because I had just painted the walls light blue, something I had never posted on social networks. It was the confirmation that, somehow, that person had still managed to observe me. I ran to show the email to a college technology professor, and he recommended that I take the case to the police. The problem is that, as always, I had no solid evidence of who was behind it. Only anonymous messages and that horrible experience that seemed increasingly difficult to explain without sounding like paranoia. Today, years later, I still cover all the cameras in the house, including the cell phone. It may seem like an exaggeration, but the memory of that night when I saw my own image appear without permission never left my head. To this day I find myself wondering if, somewhere, there is still someone with recordings that I never authorized. I never found out who it was or how it got access, but I know that the feeling of having been watched inside my own room is something I don't wish for anyone. And you, have you ever thought about what could be on the other side of your camera when you forget to cover it? Story 4. I've always been the type to spend hours playing online. It was my way of relaxing after school and talking with friends without leaving home. He played on several different servers, and usually people exchanged jokes or limited themselves to playing as a team. But one day, something started to happen that completely took away the fun of that. I noticed an unknown player who always entered the same matches as me. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but little by little, I noticed a disturbing pattern. His nickname changed with each game, but it always brought my mother's name, followed by phrases like "is watching" or "knows you." The first time, I thought it was some bad taste friend trying to scare me. But when I asked in the chat who it was, no one answered. The player was just silent, participating little in the matches, as if he was there just to observe me. That started to happen frequently on different servers, even in those where I had never played before. I told a close colleague and he laughed, saying it was probably just a troll. But the detail that bothered me was the use of my mother's name. It wasn't a common name, and I had never mentioned it out loud during the games. The idea that someone had access to personal information made me feel like I was being followed off-screen too. One night, I decided to test it. I entered a random server at dawn without telling anyone. In less than 5 minutes, the same player appeared with a different nickname, again using my mother's name. It was as if he had followed me there on purpose. My body was on alert, and I realized that it was not a coincidence. The most disturbing thing happened when, in the middle of the match, he typed in the chat, "She's in the room now." I ran to check, and of course, my mother was sleeping as usual. But the feeling that someone knew exactly what was happening inside my house terrified me. After that, I spent days avoiding turning on the computer. But curiosity spoke louder, and I decided to enter another server, already prepared to write everything down. There was no other. The player appeared again, this time with the nickname "She Hears You." I froze. No matter the time or place, he always found a way to show up. I told my father, who suggested that I format the PC. I did that, changed all the passwords, and even installed a more advanced antivirus. But the first time I played again, there he was again with a new nickname. At this point, it was clear that it wasn't just any joke. Someone had made it a personal persecution. I even changed my account and even created a totally new profile with another email. For a few days, I thought I had solved it. But then in any match, I saw the same player appear, this time with an even more direct nick. "She's not safe." The blood disappeared from my face. It was as if the person wanted me to give up playing forever. That's when I realized that it had nothing to do just with the servers. It was someone who already had too much information about me and my family. No matter what changes I made online, the chase continued. The worst was the impotence. There was no way to prove it. There were no clear traces, just the constant feeling that there was someone watching me more and more closely. Over time, I decided to stop playing. I kept the computer for a few weeks, but even so I could never really relax. Every time I passed by my mother's room, I remembered the messages and wondered how far that person could go. The game was over for me, but the feeling of vulnerability remained forever. To this day, I don't know if it was some acquaintance trying to scare me, or someone who really managed to break into my information. All I know is that, since that time, I've never been able to play online in the same way. The fear of seeing that Nick again still accompanies me. And you, if you were in my place, would you have the courage to continue playing, or would you have given up too? The scariest story is still ahead. If you're enjoying these, subscribe now. Welcome to Dark Hours. Story 5. I've always liked to enter music forums, talk to strangers, and exchange band recommendations. It was something I did at night, after studying, just to relax. One of those times, I received a private message from a user I had never seen before. It was just a link, without any explanation. At first, I hesitated, but curiosity ended up winning. I clicked, hoping maybe a video or some music file. Instead, the screen opened blank, and right in the center, only a short sentence appeared. "We see you." The same moment I read that, the doorbell of my house rang. I ran to the door still in shock, trying to understand if it was just a coincidence. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one outside. When I finally got up the courage to open, the street was completely empty, only illuminated by the poles and the light rain that began to fall. The silence only made everything even stranger. I went back inside trying to rationalize. Maybe someone had rung the bell and run away, or maybe it was a problem with the button, I thought. But when I went back to the computer, I realized that the tab with the phrase was still open. It was as if he was waiting for me. I closed the tab in a hurry, but I couldn't concentrate on anything anymore. The detail that disturbed me the most was the perfect timing between the message and the doorbell. The idea that someone could be out there, watching, while I read that sentence, gave me goosebumps. It wasn't just a virtual threat, it seemed much more real. That night, I locked all the doors and windows and kept walking from one side to the other of the house. I even took a knife from the kitchen to feel safer. Every noise coming from the street sounded like footsteps. Every car that passed by seemed to be watching. I had never felt fear like that, especially inside my own house. The next day, with the sunlight coming in through the window, I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a coincidence. I decided to check the forum again, but the account that had sent me the link had disappeared. No record, no message, as if it had never existed. That only increased the feeling that I was dealing with something much more serious than a simple online prank. I told a close friend, and she suggested that it could have been someone from the neighborhood itself, since that's the only way to explain the doorbell. The problem is that I had never disclosed my address anywhere on the internet. The forum was anonymous, I used a nickname, and there was nothing that linked my profile to my house. So how could that person have found me? That week, I was on full alert. Every time the doorbell rang, I took a long time to answer, always afraid of what I could find. There was a night when I woke up at 3 in the morning and saw that someone had left the front gate leaning, even though I always locked it. There were no signs of burglary, but the idea that someone could be wandering around the house terrified me. I decided to install a simple camera on the balcony to have some kind of security. For a few days, nothing happened. But then, on a rainy dawn, the doorbell rang again. When I went to review the recordings the next day, the camera had stopped working just at the time the ringtone happened. I could never explain what happened that week. I changed my computer, created new online profiles, and even changed some habits, but the memory of that phrase on the screen and the ringing of the doorbell never left my head. To this day, when I receive links from strangers, I feel a chill down my spine. Maybe it was an absurd coincidence. Maybe someone was really watching me that night. What I know is that I never felt totally safe surfing the internet again. And you, would you have the courage to open an anonymous link after something like this? Story 6. I always used messaging apps to chat in groups, meet new people, and laugh at random jokes. So, when I received the invitation to join a closed group, I saw no problem. At first, it seemed like something normal. Memes, quick conversations, and people interacting without much sense. Nothing that drew attention. But one night, in the middle of funny messages, someone sent a photo of me standing in front of the school. I hadn't posted that on social media, nor sent it to anyone. It was clearly recent, taken from afar, and the idea that someone from the group knew exactly where I studied left me without reaction. At the time, I thought it was some classmate from his own school making fun of me, but the number that sent the photo was completely unknown. I asked who had sent that, and no one answered. On the contrary, they started sending only emojis laughing, as if everyone already knew something I didn't know. I deleted the photo from my phone, but the image kept hammering into my head. I was wondering who would have taken that, and especially why. The scariest detail is that I was alone that day when I left the building, so someone had followed me without me noticing. I decided to leave the group at the same time, but I received a notification that they had added me back minutes later. This time, someone sent another photo, me walking through the school parking lot, clearly taken from inside a car. It was impossible for that to be a coincidence. I came home on alert, looking over my shoulder all the time. When I told my parents, they got scared and told me to block all the numbers. I did it, but the fear that someone was physically following me became even stronger than the concern with the messages. The next day, I took courage and checked the surroundings of the school more carefully. I didn't see anyone in particular, but I had the clear impression that there was always a car parked near the gate, a black sedan with dark windows. It may be paranoia, but it looked like the same car that appeared in the reflection of the glass in the photo they had sent. At night, I received another notification, a new group created, and I was already added. The name of the group was simply Ethan. The worst thing was seeing that the cover photo was my house, taken from the street outside. It was at that moment that I realized that it had gone too far, that it was not just a bad joke. I deleted the app at the same time, but I still spent the night awake. The idea that someone already knew my address, frequented the same places as me, and still made a point of showing it, was suffocating. With every noise on the street, I ran to the window, thinking I would see someone standing watching me. My parents decided to call the police, but there was not much to do without concrete evidence. I showed the screenshots, but the numbers were all unknown and probably disposable. I left the police station with the feeling that I was completely vulnerable, without any real protection against it. To this day I have no idea who was behind that group. I never reinstalled the application again, and avoid accepting invitations from strangers on any network. But I still feel chills when I remember the photos, especially the one taken in front of my house. It was the kind of experience that made me completely lose confidence in online interactions. I don't know if it was someone I knew or a stranger who decided to target me, but I know it could have ended in a much worse way. And you, have you ever joined an online group that seemed harmless and ended up revealing something too scary? Story 7. I was on an ordinary night, studying on the computer, when a video call started flashing on the screen. The contact was unknown, but on impulse I answered. There was no image, only a black screen, but on the other side a low voice began to repeat my name, several times in the same tone, without stopping. I was paralyzed looking at the screen, trying to understand if it was some kind of prank. I hung up quickly and tried to refocus, but the feeling that someone knew exactly who I was and where I was didn't leave my head. A few hours later, as if to confirm my fear, I received an anonymous email. The attachment was a photo of the facade of my house. At the same time, my heart raced. The photo was recent. You could clearly see my father's car parked at the entrance. This meant that whoever had taken it was nearby, watching maybe the same night. I couldn't sleep. Every headlight that passed on the street made me run to the window to check if anyone was standing outside. I showed the message to my parents, but they thought it could be some bad taste prank, maybe someone from school trying to scare me. I wanted to believe it, but the call on the computer, with that voice repeating my name, still echoed in my head. It didn't seem like any joke, it looked like personal. In the following days, I began to avoid being alone at home as much as possible. I disconnected the webcam, covered the lens with adhesive tape, and changed all the passwords. Even so, each new notification in the email made me panic, afraid of finding more photos or threats. The feeling of being monitored was constant, as if someone had access to my routine without me noticing. One night, I received another call, this time on my cell phone. I just heard the same voice repeating my name, now faster, almost as if I were impatient. I turned it off right away and put the device in airplane mode, but I knew it wouldn't stop there. I decided to save the audios and prints to show the police. The agent listened carefully, but explained that it was difficult to track without more information. They just told me not to interact and keep the records. I left there frustrated, feeling that I was alone in that situation. Whoever it was, still one step ahead. That same week, when I came back from school, I found an envelope in the mailbox without a sender. Inside there was only a blank sheet with my name written in the center, in large letters. There was nothing beyond that, but that was enough to convince me that the person was not only behind a screen, She knew where I lived and wanted me to know that. After that day, I never received calls or emails again. Everything stopped as suddenly as it started, but the fear never went away. To this day, every time I see an unknown call notification, my body freezes for a few seconds. I could never use the webcam again without feeling a chill down my spine. I don't know who was behind that, if it was someone close or a complete stranger, but I know he wanted to make me vulnerable. And he did it. To this day I wonder, if you were in my place, would you have answered that call or would you have let it ring until it stopped? Story 8. I've always liked participating in technology forums. It was my space to learn new things and talk to people who had the same interests. But I started to notice something weird. Every time I opened a topic or commented on one, the same user appeared soon after. At first I thought it was a coincidence, just someone else active in the community. Over time, I realized that his comments were not just about technology. He started releasing strange details like the times I used to post, or making jokes about when I disappeared for a few days. It was as if he was watching me, following every step, even outside the forum. At first I tried to ignore it, but it was getting more and more personal. He once commented on how I always stayed online after 11, and again he said something like, "You must be tired after your race yesterday." I had never talked about my schedules or habits on the forum, so the feeling that he was monitoring me began to grow. What really made me freeze was when I received a private message. It was short but direct. "I liked your blue t-shirt yesterday." I had worn exactly a blue t-shirt the day before, when I went out to buy some things at the market near my house. I had never posted pictures of myself, much less talked about what I was wearing. At the time, I felt a mixture of anger and fear. I answered asking who he was and how he knew that, but I didn't get any answer. The user simply stopped posting publicly, as if he had disappeared. But somehow it made me even more nervous because it meant that he could still be there just watching me in silence. I began to notice my surroundings more, trying to remember if someone had stared at me in the market or on the street. Each person with the cell phone in his hand looked suspicious. It was disturbing to think that someone could be taking pictures of me without me noticing, only to later prove to me that they had this power. I began to avoid wearing the blue t-shirt and even other more flashy clothes, afraid of giving some detail that could be mentioned again. I also drastically reduced my posts on the forums, because every time I wrote something, I felt like I was giving more ammunition to that person. The internet, which used to be a place of leisure for me, has become a space full of anxiety. I talked to some close friends, and one of them suggested that I create a new profile, starting from scratch. I did that, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Whenever I entered any forum, I was waiting for that same user to appear. Even months later, I still find myself looking to the sides when I leave the house, trying to find out if someone continues to accompany me without me knowing. To this day I don't know who was behind that account. It may have been someone who knew me personally, trying to scare me, or a complete stranger who, somehow, knew too many details about my life. The fact that I never discovered the origin only made everything worse, because the mystery is what keeps me alert to this day. I've never used those forums in the same way again, and the feeling of exposure continues to accompany me. Sometimes I wonder if that user is still out there, just waiting for a new opportunity. And you, what would you do if someone online started describing things that could only be seen in person? Story 9. I was looking for ways to earn extra income when I found a remote assistant ad on a job site. The text seemed normal. It talked about organizing spreadsheets, answering emails, and other simple tasks. I decided to send my resume, and on the same day, I received an answer. They said they would do a quick interview by chat. At first, the questions were what I expected: previous experiences, programs that I knew how to use, availability of schedules. But little by little, the tone began to change. The recruiter wanted to know my night habits, if I stayed up late, and suddenly asked directly if I lived alone. I tried to break the conversation, answering vaguely, but the feeling that it was not a real interview began to bother me. There was no company logo, nor clear information about the position. I asked about the contract, and they simply changed the subject, insisting again on knowing where I lived and what my daily routine was. That's when I decided to end the conversation. I wrote that I was no longer interested and that I preferred to look for other opportunities. Seconds later, I received the last message. "So you're not at home now, right?" My whole body locked, as if someone had put a camera watching me. At the same time, I closed the laptop and kept looking around the room, trying to understand how that person could know something so specific. I hadn't turned on the camera or microphone at any time. The simple fact that someone suggested they knew where I was too scary. I felt like running out of the house, but I was also afraid to open the door and find someone outside. I told my parents on my cell phone, and they asked me to go to their house immediately. I took some things in a hurry and drove, without even looking straight back. I spent the night awake, afraid that, somehow, that recruiter could appear by surprise. The next day, I showed the whole conversation to my father, who works with IT. He said it looked more like an attempt at a scam, or even a digital persecution. We immediately changed all my passwords. I deactivated the accounts I had used to look for a job, and even formatted the computer. But even so, the feeling of being exposed did not go away. For a few days, I was watching the street through the window, looking for stopped cars or strange people circulating. I didn't see anything abnormal, but the anxiety wouldn't leave me alone. The simple fact that someone made me believe that I was being watched had been enough to make me paranoid. Over time, life returned to normal, but to this day I think about that moment when the message appeared on the screen. It was as if, for a few seconds, all the barriers between my personal life and the online world had disappeared. I have never applied for vacancies again without searching very well before, and I avoid sharing personal information on any form as much as possible. I still wonder if it was just a scammer trying to scare, or someone who was really watching me at that very moment. The most disturbing thing is never having discovered the answer. And you, would you have the courage to continue an online interview if the person started to know details of your life that you never shared? Story 10. But don't leave yet, because something unexpected comes after this one. I've always had the habit of writing my thoughts on a document on the computer. No big deal, just a kind of personal diary, where I vented about the day, my insecurities, and even secrets that I never told anyone. It was a space that I believed was only mine, completely private. One day, while browsing random forums, I found a post that made me freeze. The anonymous user had written a text identical to one of my outbursts, word for word. It wasn't similar, it was exactly the same. It was impossible for it to have stopped there without someone having accessed my computer. At the time, I closed the page and tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, but there was no way it could be. The typos, the unfinished sentences, even the way I used dashes were the same. It was as if someone had copied and pasted directly from my file. My heart raced just thinking that someone had managed to invade something I considered safe. In the following days, I returned to the forum and realized that it was not just a stretch. Other outbursts of mine were also there, published as if they were someone else's reports. There were details that no one, absolutely no one, but me could know. It was as if my most intimate space had been exposed to the whole world. I ran to check the document on my computer, and it was still there, untouched. No sign of alteration or strange access. But this only increased my panic, because if there was nothing visible, it meant that someone had a copy of everything I wrote in real time. I even started to distrust the camera and microphone, covered both with adhesive tape, and turned off the Wi-Fi for hours. I told a trusted friend, and she suggested that I could have some spy program installed without realizing it. I scanned the computer, installed new antiviruses, but nothing was detected. Even so, every time I opened the file to write, I felt that someone was reading with me. One night, I decided to test it. I purposely wrote an invented phrase, something absurd that I would never have said anywhere. I'm afraid of finding a red door in my room. The next day, I entered the same forum, and there it was, published by that same anonymous user, as if it were another account of him. At that moment, I was sure that someone was literally following every word I typed. What scared me the most was the intention. Why would anyone do that? There were no requests for money, no direct threats, only the exposure of my most intimate thoughts. It was as if the person wanted to show me that he had this power over me, reminding me that I no longer had any privacy. I stopped writing in the diary for weeks, but the feeling of vigilance didn't go away. Even without opening the file, I still saw new posts appearing on the forum, always with the same style, as if the invader was forging my thoughts. It was as if he wanted to convince me that he could replace me, that he could speak for me without anyone noticing the difference. I even considered changing computers, but the fear that it was something even bigger, maybe connected to my account, my email, or even the home network, paralyzed me. I didn't know where to start protecting myself. I just knew that, with each new text published, it seemed that that person wanted to prove to me that I was completely vulnerable. One day it just stopped. No new post appeared, and I've never seen anything like it again. But the insecurity stayed. To this day, when I write anything on the computer, no matter how banal it is, I feel a pang of fear, as if someone could be reading on the other side. The feeling of invasion was so strong that it turned something that was once therapeutic into a habit full of distrust. I never found out who was behind or how they got access. Maybe it was someone close, maybe some stranger. But to this day I wonder, if you noticed that your most intimate thoughts were being published by someone on an anonymous forum, what would you do? You've made it to the end. Thank you for listening until now. But before we close, I have one last story for you. When I created a profile on a dating site, I never imagined that it would be a cause for concern. At first it seemed normal, until an account without a photo started sending me messages every day. The messages were not aggressive, but the tone was strange, always talking as if he knew me better than I let it show in the profile. I tried to block the account several times, but it was no use. Whenever I did this, a new identical profile appeared minutes later, with the same way of writing and the same sentences. I started to get uncomfortable, but I still thought it was just someone too insistent, until the situation changed completely. One Friday night, I received a different message. The profile sent a photo taken outside my house. It was my illuminated window, clearly seen from the street. I was shocked, because it meant that the person not only knew where I lived, but had already been there. At that moment, I realized that it wasn't just someone bothering me online, it was something much more serious. I ran to close the curtains and turned off all the lights. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like they were going to hear it outside. I spent the rest of the night peeking through the window gap, trying to see if there was any car stopped or someone walking on the sidewalk. But I didn't see anything, as if the person had disappeared right after taking the picture. The next day, I showed the photo to a close friend, who was also scared. He insisted that I call the police, but I didn't have enough evidence of who was behind it. It was just a faceless profile and an image that anyone could have taken. Still, the idea that someone was watching me closely made me paranoid. I started to notice all the details of the neighborhood. Cars stopped for a long time, people walking too slowly down the street, even the noise of footsteps at night seemed suspicious. The worst thing was not having a way to know who was behind it. Blocking the profiles made no difference, because another one always appeared almost immediately. I even deleted my account on the dating site, thinking it would solve it, but it didn't help. On the same day I closed the profile, I received an email from a strange address with the same photo from my window. The message was short: "I can still see you." It was at that moment that I realized that no matter what I did online, the person had already crossed the virtual line. I completely changed my routine after that. I started to avoid turning on lights in certain rooms, and even changed rooms for a few weeks, sleeping in the living room so as not to give clues to where I was. Still, every noise outside left me on alert, as if at any moment I could catch someone watching me through the window. Over time, the messages stopped. I never received any photos or emails again, but that didn't bring peace. In fact, the silence only made me even more suspicious. To this day, every time I pass in front of my own window, I wonder if there isn't someone hiding on the street, just waiting for the right moment to appear again. I never found out who it was or what I wanted, and perhaps this is the most disturbing detail. Have you ever been through something like this, where someone without a face seemed to know too much about you? What would you do if, out of nowhere, you received a photo taken from outside your house? Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.